Well, great to be here. My passion is psychological well-being, and I want to ask the question, what can we do? What can we best do to help our children and young people thrive and flourish? And I'm going to suggest that a part of the answer is a piece of punctuation and a letter of the alphabet. Is she mad? A dot and a B. Now, a few of you will know what this stands for. By the end of the talk, you'll all know. But first, I'm going to go on and talk about my understanding of mindfulness. So, mindfulness is primarily about attention. It's a way of paying attention to our ongoing experience. And in mindfulness training, we learn how to sustain our attention. And we learn to do this in two kinds of ways. One is to focus our attention on an object, such as a bodily sensation or our breath. But we also learn to broaden our attention. So, for example, to pay attention to sounds as they arise and die away, the obvious sounds, more subtle sounds, or broaden our attention to our thoughts. And again, it may be the thoughts that are always there, the recurrent ones, the strong ones, but it may also be those thoughts that are kind of hazy and preconscious and might be the very germs of our creative ideas. So it's both about focusing and about broadening. And another important part of the attention is to recognize that our minds wander. It's just what minds do. So with the best will in the world, we might be trying to sustain our attention, but our mind goes off on a journey of its own. And we need to acknowledge that and just bring it gently back to whatever it is we are trying to attend to. Now, some people make the mistake of thinking that that's all mindfulness is. It's just about present moment awareness. But there's much more to it than that. There's also an intention and an attitude. The intention is about choosing what we're going to pay attention to. So it's not just that strong stimuli in the environment grab our attention, it's that we choose what we're going to attend to. And we do so because we're trying to understand our experiences. And the attitude is also profoundly important. It's about not judging. So whatever it is that comes up in terms of our thoughts, our feelings, our sensations, things in the world, we try not to judge them. We try to just notice them with curiosity and interest, but not to judge. Because in the West, we're particularly good at giving ourselves a hard time, at beating ourselves up. You know, there's those recurrent thoughts about, I'm not good enough, I can't, I won't. But part of the awareness is about noticing that we're having those thoughts and not feeding those thoughts, just like Jane Goodall was talking about this morning with the wolves. We don't need to feed those thoughts about not being good enough and not being able and so on. And then those thoughts won't grow, and the underlying neurons that are activated will not get stronger. So it's about other kinds of thoughts. Maybe I can, I'm okay, I'll give it a go. So we can feed those thoughts, and then the underlying neural pathways will get stronger when we do that. So the attitude that we have to bring here is an attitude of gentleness and kindness to our ongoing experience. Now, why does this matter? What are the benefits of mindfulness? And there's various kinds of benefits. One is that it allows us to savor positive experiences. So, for example, savoring the chocolate yesterday was a delightful experience, or noticing a child smiling, noticing the passing clouds. So savoring is one good thing. But also managing painful or negative experiences. And actually pain is a very good example, because often when we feel pain, we tense and brace. And actually that makes the pain worse. But if instead we soften and open and look at the pain with curiosity and interest, and be kind to ourselves. It's not necessarily that the pain goes away, it doesn't go away, but our relationship to the pain changes. So that's one of the benefits, savouring the positive, managing the negative. And another huge benefit is if we're aware of, let's say, our habitual thoughts, our habitual ways of acting, the fact, let's say, that if we're stressed, we go for the bottle or the cigarette or the fridge, whatever is our way of doing these things. If we're aware that that's what we're doing, then we can become better at self-regulating. And Roy Baumeister very persuasively argued yesterday that self-regulation is one of our most important strengths. So being mindful allows us to regulate ourselves more. And I think the other very, very important thing is when we become aware of our habitual ways of behaving, of our thoughts, of our feelings, we can get greater clarity. And that clarity in turn leads to making better choices and better decisions. Now, there's a couple of common misunderstandings about mindfulness. One of them is that mindfulness and meditation are just kind of the same thing. And while there is a lot of overlap between them, they're not the same, because you can be mindful without meditating, and you can meditate without being mindful. So we can bring mindfulness into our everyday activities without actually sitting, cross-legged and meditating. I don't know if any of you have had the experience of showering or brushing your teeth in the morning mindfully. It's a great way to start a day. Or if you want to go into a meeting, an important meeting, let's say, if you just take a moment to be mindful before you go into that meeting, noticing how you're thinking, how you're feeling, what's going on in the body, what's going on in the mind, and then when you're in the meeting, not only noticing what's going on within you, but also noticing what's going on for other people, then very often the outcome of a meeting can be far more successful. So there's a lot of good reasons why mindfulness is a helpful thing. And one of the extraordinary things that's happened is just a few years ago, if I or anyone else gave a talk to a general audience about mindfulness, the vast majority of people wouldn't have heard of it. And it's changed. Now I'm sure the majority of you, perhaps all of you, are familiar with it, perhaps have a deeply embedded practice as well. What has gone on in the intervening few years? There's been an extraordinary revolution. And this was depicted on the cover of Time magazine earlier this year about the mindful revolution. So many people and so many groups and organizations seem to be benefiting. For instance, in the education sector, students and teachers are benefiting from mindfulness training. In the health sector, patients and staff. In employment, leaders, workers, people benefiting from mindfulness. And one of the questions I've asked myself is, what would our politics be like if our politicians were mindful? And again, something very extraordinary has happened in the UK. Now, this is the House of Commons, the chamber of the House of Commons in the UK Parliament. As of a year ago, my colleagues have been delivering mindfulness-based stress reduction training courses, this is the John Kabat-Zinn course, to parliamentarians inside the Houses of Parliament. So this is to MPs and also members of the upper house, the House of Lords, and now something like 100 of them have gone through an MBSR course. Earlier this month, the all-party parliamentary group on mindfulness was launched in the Houses of Parliament. And their aim is to introduce mindfulness into key policy areas. And the target areas that they've identified are health, education, criminal justice, and employment. And parliamentarians in the UK are working really hard to introduce mindfulness into all these areas. It is truly extraordinary. If any of you here is a politician, has access to politicians, perhaps you could encourage them to do the same thing here, because I do think our Australian politicians could do with a dose of mindfulness. Okay. So, how has this happened? Why has this happened? Part of it is to do with the frantic lives we lead. We try to balance our work, our families, multiple generations. We often need to help. And some of us are surgically attached to our internet and social media. So we lead these very frantic lives. And we want to find peace in these frantic lives. So a lot of people are turning towards mindfulness as a way to find peace. I think the fact that since the late 70s, there has been mindfulness training which is completely secular has also been very helpful to people who wouldn't otherwise perhaps try that approach. And I think another absolutely key thing is the science and the neuroscience that has been done over recent years to show the evidence of benefit, to show what's actually happening in the brain and in our behavior following mindfulness training. And I think that is the thing that has really persuaded people that it's okay, it's helpful and beneficial. So, just a couple of examples of some of the neuroscience. Following a standard 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction course, you can see structural changes in the brain, in the very regions where you would expect change to happen. So the regions that are related to self-awareness, bodily awareness, attention, compassion, you can see structural changes after a mere 8 weeks, and that's quite remarkable. You can also see functional changes. So greater activation in the left frontal lobe, which is where, which tends to be activated in positive mood states, happiness and other positive states. So you can see a shift towards the left following just an 8-week course. And also in terms of physiology. Randomized controlled trials have been done which show that immune function improves following an 8-week course of mindfulness. For example, classic Richie Davidson work giving a flu vaccine and showing that the people who had the mindfulness training had many more antibodies, which is good, in response to the flu vaccine than a control group. So very powerful effects after just a short time. And I think that is what has impressed people, and there's so much more work that's done on this. And Mind and Life, very extraordinary organization, initially in the US, now in Europe. Mathieu Ricard has been very involved right from the beginning, has been in the forefront of this work, bringing together contemplative traditions and neuroscience. And I think that's been enormously persuasive. But I want now to turn to mindfulness and education. If mindfulness is such a good thing, surely we ought to be giving it, offering it to our young people. So Mathieu mentioned an example in primary schools, a mindfulness curriculum that helped a great deal with young children. And I would like to talk about a curriculum that we've developed in the UK. Oh, and just before that, some wonderful systematic reviews, meta-analyses showing the benefits of mindfulness in schools in terms of cognitive skills, academic, social skills, better self-regulation, emotion regulation. Self-esteem is not a bad thing necessarily. That's been increased, as well as improved mood and less psychological symptoms. So I'm going to turn now to this particular thing that we've developed in the UK, the Mindfulness in Schools project. The adult materials, MBSR materials, have been developed for adolescents, and you have to really have good materials if you want to engage adolescents. So they use video clips like Kung Fu Panda or Last Samurai, because in these, the hero at some stage is not doing well, but becomes very focused, very present, and then does amazing feats. There's exercises like plunging the children into darkness and showing a searchlight and showing how when you turn the searchlight onto little objects, you can really light them up in an extraordinary way. And you can do this with the searchlight of the brain. You can choose what experiences to light up. Now, language is very important with young people, with everybody. And one of the things they learn is the body scan. And let's just try it right now, if you wish. If you have both feet firmly on the floor and just notice what it feels like, the sense of the pressure of your feet on the floor, perhaps you can feel your shoes touching your skin, maybe the warmth of socks. And another contact point is the sense of your buttocks on the seat. Just pay attention to what that feels like. Now, for the young people, we call that fofbok. Feet on floor, bum on chair. And they love it, and when a teacher walks into a room and says fofbok, all the kids just sit very quietly close their eyes, breathe, and it's a wonderful thing. 7-11 is another one. Breathing in for 7, out for 11. It's a good way to teach young people how to manage their breath. The mindful mouthful is about eating mindfully, and that's a wonderful thing. We discovered it yesterday. A great cure for obesity, I believe, or prevention. And finally, this one speaks for itself, I think, meditation. It's what kids learn to do before they go off to sleep, and they report much better sleep. Now, another thing that these very inspirational teachers developed in this project is they allowed children to send each other a text message once a day, and this was the message, .b. And that's an instruction, stop, B, breathe. And when an adolescent, 14, 15-year-old received this message, they loved it. Permission to be still, permission just to be. So .b has now become the name of the course. This was the results of the first study that we did, just 150 pupils, and we found that, no surprise, the more they practiced, the better the results in terms of well-being, resilience, and mindfulness itself. But that was a very short course. It was only 4 lessons. The boys themselves in that early study, it was all boys, told us they needed more, and it's now a 9-lesson curriculum. And we've recently published a much bigger study of over 500 children in 12 schools. Half of them had the mindfulness, half didn't. They were matched in all sorts of other ways. And on the left, you'll see that right after mindfulness training, compared to the control group, well-being was high, depressive symptoms were low, and, excitingly, this lasted for 3 months beyond that, even though there was no further training, and the kids were just about to do their exams. So that was really encouraging. Well-being remained high, depressive symptoms remained low. Okay, mindful teachers are profoundly important. We must help our teachers to be mindful, because otherwise they can't teach mindfulness to the children. We know it goes beyond schools. Many companies now teach mindfulness. Google's been doing it for years. And I just want to finish with the implications for policy. There are many wonderful programs to increase well-being in our children, to do with resilience, to do with strengths, and many, many others. But I believe that mindfulness training is foundational to all of these others. What could be more foundational, after all, than learning how to pay attention, self-regulate, and be kind to yourself and then to others? What could be more foundational than that? So I'd like to think that what we can do is shift the whole population towards mindfulness. This is a mental health spectrum. On the left, you see the common mental disorders, depression, anxiety. Some people don't have them to a clinically significant degree, but they're languishing. Some people are flourishing. In our lives, we can move up and down this spectrum. And of course, as compassionate people, we want to help the people who've got the disorders, no question about that. But epidemiology, the science of population, tells us that's not enough. Because if we just treat the people who have the disorder, there'll be plenty more where they came from. So we need to treat the population. We need to make a shift in the whole population towards flourishing. And we can do that, I believe, by teaching mindfulness in schools. So just to conclude, I think policy should have a new aim. It should be to help as many people as possible to flourish, which involves developing their full creative potential, being mindful towards themselves and others, and contributing to a thriving society. Thank you.